Thank you, Bill. When I noticed that I was the last scheduled research speaker, I was certain, since we were going to run late, that I would be out of time or I'd only be given a minute or two. But I noticed we're about 10 minutes ahead of schedule, so I get 10 minutes. Oh, okay. Thank you, Bill. And thanks to our very strict master of ceremonies here, and also to the disciplined speakers who preceded me. My research focus is on government policy. I've worked in the past mostly with agricultural economists on agricultural trade policy, on farm subsidy policies, on agricultural development policy, particularly in Africa, and on policies toward agricultural technology, including biotechnology. But my newest published work is on obesity policies, comparing obesity policies in the United States to policies in Europe and Japan in particular. This book from Oxford University Press is going to come out next month. The somewhat tabloid title and the lurid jacket art, that was Oxford University Press, believe it or not, who insisted upon that. The purpose of this book is to explain why the United States is such an outlier among other advanced industrial countries, both in the prevalence of obesity. Obesity prevalence in the United States is twice as high as it is in Europe, and also in per capita consumption of fossil fuels. CO2 emissions per capita in the United States are also twice as high as in Europe. So this is a book about climate change as well as obesity. That's why they inserted the two tires in there, to suggest that we drive too much as well as eat too much. My explanation for America's excess in these two areas is not going to be fully satisfying to those on the political left, because I'm saying it's not just corporate greed. My explanation's also not going to be fully satisfying to those on the political right, because I'm saying it's not just a decline in personal responsibility. I identify the deep foundation of America's distinctive tendency to overconsume both food and fuel. I find these deep foundations in geographic and demographic and geologic differences between the United States and the rest of the industrial world. Also, the distinctiveness of our unique and easily paralyzed political institutions, and also our distinct culture, our highly individualistic culture, leaves us more prone than in other societies to overconsume both food and fuel. In fact, I find America's unique overconsumption of food and fuel to be so overdetermined that it's unlikely to be significantly corrected. And this leads me to a pessimistic conclusion. As America keeps failing to set in place the policies that might be needed to mitigate obesity, like taxes on soda consumption, we don't have any at the federal level, restrictions on advertising food to children, we don't have any. Restrictions on what kinds of foods can be purchased with food stamp benefits, we don't have any. A restoration of mandatory physical education in public high schools, we haven't done that. As we continue to fail in doing the things that might help mitigate the obesity problem, our political leaders may tacitly give up on mitigation and pivot toward a posture of adaptation toward obesity. And this will include doing a number of good things, including more public support for medical treatment and for surgeries for those whose health has been placed at risk because they've become obese. It will mean larger investments in physical accommodations for the obese, and it will mean stronger legal protections against, for example, workplace discrimination for the obese. These are all good things, but I describe this adaptation posture as a distant second best to effective mitigation because it's unlikely to work well for those segments of the American population that are most likely to become obese, namely those with low education, those with low income, disadvantaged racial minorities. These portions of the population have much more trouble gaining access to medical treatments, to the assistance that they will need to live with the condition. So in a sense, America's unresolved obesity crisis is going to be, in the end, just one more component of our larger unresolved problem with inequality. But in the few minutes that I have left, I'd like to cram in a preview of my next research project, which will consider two alternative regulatory futures for livestock and fish production in developing countries. And we know that meat and fish consumption in developing countries is going to increase rapidly in the next 3 or 4 decades. This data is from the International Food Policy Research Institute, using population and income growth projections to project nearly a doubling of total meat consumption in the developing countries in the years ahead out to 2050 compared to 2002. This is meat, dairy, and eggs also up. And fish production also. This is global fish production from 1950 out to 2011. You can see the steady increase, but notice that the wild fish catch hasn't really been increasing for 15 years, and the increase now is being provisioned by fish farming. And this is particularly growing in Asia. You can see the share of the farmed fish population that's in Asia. Asia invented fish farming. The Chinese invented fish farming with carp in the 5th century BC. And to the present day, 60% of all aquaculture is located in China. But globally, the fish farming industry is now significant. In fact, in 2010, the total quantity of farmed fish exceeded the total quantity of beef produced globally. But what we don't know yet is how this rapidly growing livestock industry and fish farm industry in the developing world is going to be regulated. We do know that these industries will be highly capitalized, highly specialized, industrial scale activities. These are the facilities that are being built right now, but we don't know if they'll follow what I would call the American model of regulation or the European model of regulation. In the United States, our regulatory system actually does a pretty good job of ensuring that meat is safe for consumers to eat, but it does a poor job of protecting the environment, air quality and water quality, from untreated or mismanaged animal waste in the concentrated animal feeding operations that now dominate the industry. It also does a poor job of protecting human health from antibiotic resistance risks. In the United States, 80% of all antibiotic use takes place in the livestock industry, not to protect the health of the animals, but to accelerate growth. And the American model also uses extreme animal confinement in order to reduce labor costs, reduce feed costs, but with little regard for humane treatment of the animals. The European model, very quickly, is quite different. The European model, in part because Europe is so much more densely populated, 4 times as densely populated as the United States. Environmental protection is much stronger. Antibiotic use for weight gain has been banned since 1998, and extreme confinement in sow gestation crates or battery cages for egg-laying hens has been outlawed. So the question is, which way will the developing countries go? If Vietnam is any indication, Vietnam is now the 5th largest pork-producing country on the globe. They'll be following the American model rather than the European model, which I think will bring costs. But this is a question I'd like to ask. It's a hypothesis I'd like to test in my next project. Thank you very much.